bought this in Barcelona. I'm going to make it into a yukata. It's 100% cotton. It's a cotton lawn, so it is extremely thin. You can see here. You can see my hands going through there. But isn't that print just beautiful? It's Japanese textile, so this was made in Japan. And although we're going into winter, I'm going to make this into a yukata now, and it'll be perfect to wear around the house when it gets a bit hot. It's 110 centimeters wide. I can tell that's 10 centimeters, which is about 43 to 45 inches. So to make this, I've bought 4 meters, as you can see it trail off there, of 4 meters or 4 yards roundabouts of this fabric. And to turn this into strips to make into a yukata, I have to cut it. I won't cut it, I'm going to tear it into thirds. It's a plain weave cotton lawn, so if you pull hard enough, it will tear straight down the grain. I just need to press it. I've washed it, so now I'm going to press it all so it shrinks a little bit, or any shrinkage gets out of it, and then I'll find the third marks and I'll tear down them to make the strips, and then it's a matter of cutting across to make the pattern pieces. There we go. So I've torn them apart into thirds. I've pressed them again, because you need to. When you tear, obviously all the sort of sides of it pucker a little bit because the fabric's pulling away from itself. And also you're pulling, so you're going to crease it just a little bit, but it just flattens everything out again. And this is the most important time to flatten everything out again, because now you're making the length measurements. So we pressed before to get the width measurements right. We're pressing now to get the length measurements right. I've got 3 strips. Each is 4 meters long. That makes 12 meters, which is how long a tanmono is. So this is what you need to make a yukata or a kimono. This is a yukata. It's made out of cotton. It's unlined with a closed collar. I've ripped the strips apart and I've pressed them so they're nice and flat, and now I have to finish the edges. On traditional Japanese fabric, if you bought a tanmono, fabric is this wide, and on either side there's a selvage. That doesn't happen because we've taken away the selvage and we've cut this out of non-Japanese fabric. So you have raw edges all the way along for 4 meters on each side. This is what I do. I fold back the edge along the side of these strips and I sew it down. Take it back by about a centimeter, maybe a bit less, depending on how much fabric you have and how big you're making a kimono, but I put it back by a centimeter and I sew that for the 4 meters, and that gives me a finished edge, because I'm going to sew my seams and then press them flat. So once they're pressed flat, there'll just be a nice neat finished edge along there. I find that the best way to do it. It means that navigating the right angles in a kimono, if I use my model here, where 4 seams are going to meet, if they're all pressed open, it's easier for them to fall flat than if they were pressed to one side here and then the other side there. You'll see when you make it, it's just a bit easier. The fabric is cut. It's made into pattern pieces. I'll show you what I did. And I've finished the edges. you'll see now how this is going to make it easier when it comes to building the kimono. There's no more edge finishing now. It's all done. It's just about construction. So you can see I've got a raw edge there that I've just tucked under, and on the other side, this is the right side, it's just got a line of stitching. So it's a bit like a Hong Kong finish, if you know about binding within a suit. If this was to turn back, you would see a raw edge, but you're going to press the seams flat, so they're not going to turn out. And it keeps things neat, but it's quite a simple way to do it. And I did it piece by piece. So this is a main body piece. It's 3 meters long, which is 3 yards, about 9 feet, and I've sewn all the way along on either side at a 1 centimeter seam allowance, or turnover, I suppose. It's not really a seam, is it? So I've done that on both sides. Collar is the last part of what I call the preparation before we start putting together the yukata. So I'm going to bring the over collar, put it on top of the under collar, center it, and then you have to fix the over collar onto the under collar, right side, wrong side to right side, so it sits flat like that. I just pressed the over collar. I've pressed it in by 1 centimeter. So here's the over collar like this. Taken, obviously, I've turned the right side under and pressed under a 1 centimeter allowance at either end. Then what I've done, folded that exactly in half and pressed that so it's a nice sharp edge. I then took the collar, which is about 180 centimeters long, and I've pressed that in the exact center to get a nice sharp edge as well. So here it is, it's laid out. I can see this is the exact center of the collar. I'm going to take the over collar with its exact center as well, and I'm lining them up on top of each other. And it's up to you really, but because we're sewing, I'm going to pin this in place. Always double check. And pin the center to the center. Now this was cut from 1 length of fabric, and the pattern is continuous through the two, because the over collar was on the end of the collar up here. So I know that the pattern, though it might not match crossways, will match on the length. And you can see I've done that here. So this big chunky line, the little line, they're all part of the same line, and that will look really nice when it's all put together. It will flow perfectly. There you go, the center is now pinned in place. That's not moving. Now what I'm going to do is sew this folded under edge here. I'm going to sew that down with the sewing machine by getting in and sewing it along there. There's a couple of ways you can do it, but I find the easiest is to mark exactly where the collar should lie, and then you can just pick it up and sew it to that area. You'll pin it obviously before you sew, but it means finding that line easier rather than pinning, moving, pinning again, moving back. There's probably a much easier way to do this. I'm sure some of you will have an idea and you should share it, but this is what I'm going to do for mine. So I'm pinning that down here as well. I'll show you in a second. I'm not actually pinning anything to anything. I'm using the pins as guides. So I've pinned along where that sits, and if I tip that back, you can see I've got a glittery pin line where that folded edge will lie. So when it comes to sewing it, I can now bring this across, line up my fold line with the pin marking. Oop. And sew along there, nice and easy. And then I'm going to press, but you can see, or more, the fact you can't see that that's attached there. And there's a little overlap. I sewed along about maybe 4 mil in from the edge, so it's a 1 centimeter overlap. It goes over by 1 centimeter, but I've gone in and sewn halfway along that fold. So when I press this, there'll be a fold along there with a little bit of overlap underneath, rather than a big stitching line that you can see. So you want to press it so there's a little fold in it. And of course, because you're going to sew these on lengthways, those lengthways stitches will keep the fold in place. And it looks kind of cool. I'm going to do the other side. So you can see there how it's done, and I can see my line. I'm going to fold it over, press that down nice and flat. These are the pins. I'll press over them. They're metal, that doesn't matter. I'll pull everything over with the microphone cord all the way up to the other end, making sure not to pull the seam back, keeping that allowance hanging over by a few millimeter. I think it's a 1/4 inch, or where are we? I'll have a look right now. Yeah, if you holding it over by what's that, a 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch to a 1/4 inch. So if you can see here, that still lifts up there, and that's what you want. Now I'm going to secure this with a really long stitch just along here within a 1 centimeter seam line. So again, a 1/4 inch from the edge. I'm going to sew along here to secure it in place. Then this is put onto the garment. But this is your last bit of preparation before the actual construction starts. So there it is. Collar is done. Your pieces are now prepared, and we can put the garment together. There we go. So I'm ready to put the center back seam together, which runs from here down over the back. Then I'll have the full body piece as one before I put on the front extensions. This is the center back and the center back neck. So this is that shoulder mountain that I talked about before. This is the center of the center back. I've taken 5 centimeters down from there. That's where the collar will sit. So it sits back on the neck a bit. And then we go 10 centimeters in on either side. That will be chopped into. So I'll cut along the shoulder to the point where the stitching is. That will open up to help this open up as we sew around. But now it's time to sew the center back together. So I'm going to pin it, try and line all these little lines up as much as I can, and put it together. Kimono and yukata are made to be worn for generations. They're meant to last 3 generations, around 100 years. That's the saying in Japan. And the reason they're made the way they are is because they can be completely taken apart and put back together again with a lot of ease. That's actually how they used to clean them. You'd take it all apart, turn it back into the long strip of fabric, and steam it and clean it, and then sew it all back together. And if you were passing it down to someone who was a different height or weight to you, you can obviously take it in or let it out and make those changes to it. As well as that, once you start patchworking them, so once they get to a certain age, you start to patchwork in. If you get a hole around the knee or the backside on it, you put a patch of fabric in that part. Because it's all just the same sizes, you just put in any piece of fabric, and then they turn into a patchwork. The last thing they are is rags in the house before they're thrown away as pretty much thread. This is sustainable as fashion gets, honestly. If you consider as well, most people wove their own fabric at home, so there wasn't even the big factories making the fabric. You were weaving the fabric, making the clothes, and then that was worn for 100 years by 3 generations. Amazing. So you've noticed I've just cut into the centre back neck, and you see how it pulls apart and then becomes this stepped system once you fold the sides in. And you can see that the neckline is going to run around here and down the okumi. These parts are in a straight line. You have to be careful when you're pinning this. You have to get around this bend. This is actually this little bend here. These are the tough parts where you come right around a tight corner. But that's just about pinning and repinning. The other tough part of this is you're going to be pinning and then sewing down these sides here. And these can be stretched because they're not on the straight grain. They're not on the bias, but they're off grain. So they will stretch if they're not treated with respect and a little bit of time. There's no rush. That's the main thing about making one of these. Take your time and you'll get it all right. No one's hurrying you. So I'm going to line up the centre back neck with the centre back neck on the collar and start pinning the outside to the outside. So right side to right side, and then it's folded under, and you sew the underside to the wrong side later. But we'll do the right side first. So here we go. So I'm putting the collar onto the body now. In order to do that, let me just straighten up there. In order to do that, first you do back stitching just at the 2 points where you've cut into the body of the fabric. I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. Then I've pinned it in place. This is a tough part of the garment, and it does take a little bit of finessing, a lot of pinning. And what I also use is I use tacking or basting to baste the collar in place. That way I can pin it, then I baste it in place, then I can see how it falls as it comes round the tricky part, which is the top, your shoulder mounted, the katayama, around here. As it comes around here, it can often pull. It doesn't show it on this one. I actually did a good job, but it does pull. Tend to pull there, and you get little pull lines coming down here into the underarm, because that is the sharpest point of the turn. It has to, the collar, which is straight, has to go around. You'll see once you do it, and it's completely possible to do it. It just takes a little bit more time. It takes, like I said, I've said it before, it takes as much time to attach the collar as it does to make the entire garment, if you think of it that way. This is the part, and once you're done with that, then it's all just straight seams. and it's quite lovely sewing. So I'm going to take the camera down here and show you what I've done. I've taken out the pins and I've tacked it in place, basted in place. You can use whichever term you feel like. And then it's just about a lot of good pressing once you start sewing this, because then we're going to go into ditch stitching. You can, of course, what did I do here? Let's have a look. I think I ditch stitched. Yeah, I ditch stitched along here once I've done the outer collar, secure that. Obviously you won't see that stitching, and the key is to get the stitching in here underneath this little fold there, so you can't see the stitching down the front of the garment. Here is my collar. You can see it's scooping around that back neckline. This is 5 centimeters, 2 inches from the center of the garment, and these are the 2 points I'm talking about. So this was the center front, and we've clipped into that and turned them out. And just here, you can't see it, even with the camera. I've done some back stitches there just because this is being pulled back to stop it from tearing apart. So there's a couple of, not many, but there's a couple of little stitches there about 1 centimeter, so 1/2 centimeter either side of where this was. And I did that before I attached this, but I forgot to film it. I'm sure you'll be able to see that in another one of my videos. Now, I've tacked this, basted, after I've pinned it. So in this, there was probably, between here and here, there was 10 pins this way and 10 pins that way. And with a collar, you work from center front down one side, and then you do center front down the other side. You don't do this side till you've done that side. So it had loads of pins along there, and then I basted along just so I can then turn the collar back and see how it's going to sit, especially over the arms, the shoulders. And it looks like we're going to be alright, making sure there's no tucks. That looks like a bit of a tuck in there. I know it's just the way that was. So hold it up, and you'll see how it's going to fall once it's done. You can see actually there's creases there where I actually removed the tucking before I basted it, because it was tucking with just the pins. Ooh. I am absolutely losing my fabric because I took all my dessert pots off it. I'm going to stitch along where I basted, starting in the center, back and working down one side, starting in the center, back and working down the other. And then I'll be closing the ends and bagging them out, and then I'll do the other side. The collar is done. You can see it here, nice and even at where the over collar meets the collar. Very happy. Now the last part of actually constructing, putting the pieces together, the last 2 pieces of the 8 are the sleeves. So I'm going to attach them, which is really, after you've done the collar, everything seems a bit straightforward. You're laying out straight pieces of fabric and sewing straight line to straight line. It gets good now. After, you can see I've probably gone grey just from sewing that collar. My yukata certainly has gone grey. So I'm going to put the sleeves on, give everything a good press at each stage, of course, but it's straight sewing from point to point for a lot of it now. And then I'll go around and hem. After I've done the sleeves, do the side seams, and then hem, and that's it. Let's get going. the sleeves are attached and they're pressed all the way around. This is the shoulder, where the shoulder meets the sleeve. Now what I'm doing is I'm flipping them over, right sides together, and I'm putting together the side seam. Now, I'm making this for me, so this is a men's yukata, which means it doesn't have an opening here under the arm, which women do. This is called miyatsuguchi. If you do have that, obviously you would just sew to here, or here. You'd leave a little gap, and the size of that you can work out. I've written it down as well. If not, you sew up until here. You sew right up into the it'll be like this, and you sew just below where the sides meet the sleeves. And this is left, well, it's not left raw, but you don't sew over and then around it. You sew to here and then you finish this separately, and that way the two pieces remain separate and you get less pulling up to the neckband. It'll all make sense later, I'll show you that, but I just thought I'd show you the interior while I'm here, of what I'm doing. This is why I've kept all my tacks, all my marks in place, because I can marry that as much as it doesn't looks like sort of cotton or iron wool, steel wool. This is quite useful, knowing where to meet everything together, because this is where your side seam is. If you get this wrong, this does go wonky, but again, it's just a big long seam all the way down. It should be easy. But yeah, so yeah, this is pressed out, all done. The side seams are sewn, and so now, before I hem the garment, I'm gonna put the sleeves, close the sleeves. This again is a male yukata, so this is the back of the sleeve. This is the side seam here where it meets the garment. This is the back of the sleeve. You can leave that open on a woman's yukata, on a woman's kimono, but technically on yukata they're closed. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open this, so it's like this. I'm going to sew again. You can see in here, because we've back tacked, there we go, because we've back tacked 5 times, you get these little bolts. You do need them, and you'll notice that when you're pressing and putting it all together, you'll notice how useful these are if you haven't put them in, because the seam's only so strong. A machine sewn seam, a hand stitch seam, you don't need as many, but I do 5 as well because it's just a round number that I like, that is easier to count. So I'm going to start sewing about 1 centimeter down from those tacks. I'm going to come down. This will be pressed like that. Well, it'll be pressed open. I'm going to come down, I'm going to close along here, and I'm going to come up to where I've marked the cuff opening. And that's it done. As you're pressing the sleeves, I'll bring it over here if I can. So you press the edges, there you go, it's very sharp. When you're pressing this side, make sure you straighten everything up, and as you press down the side seam, it should line up along here. So you see that seam's pressed in, that seam's pressed in, and this, I think, is quite a lovely sight, to have that perfect separation there that then follows into the seam. Absolutely beautiful. So I've pressed my sleeve, the seams of my sleeve. I've pressed them all now. I've left my tacks in for the cuff because I'm going to talk about that next. As you're pressing in from the outside, so once you've turned it back and you're pressing the right side of it, you can just slightly, using the contour of, or using the fold of the seam coming up the front of the sleeve, to turn under the bit that isn't sewn, which is the cuff, and you can press that into place. What I'm going to do now is just pin a few times around the outside, so when I'm sewing it doesn't slip or rope, and then I'm going to close that with an edge stitch just along the outside. It looks fantastic if you can do, say, a blind stitch, or you can hand sew it on, but there's enough machine stitching, top stitching on the outside of this that I can just go around and it won't look too out of place. But this, so you see your sleeve, when you press it from the outside, once it's all turned out the right side, make sure you repress the Sodeyama, the sleeve mountain, the one that goes along here. Where's mine? Here. Comes along here and across the shoulders on the shoulder mountain as well. And if you do that, then it's easier to fold. So when it comes to storage, it's part of having a Japanese garment is these markings help you store it, hang it up, and it also just makes it look nice. There you go. So what I'm going to do now is run around, pin this in place around the cuff and run around with an edge stitch, and then I'm going to hem the garment with a 1 centimeter turnover and a 4 centimeter turnover all around the bottom, and then it's done. So just a lot of pressing to do and I'll be all finished. Brilliant. I'm going to have some more tea first. There it is. And I'm going to carry on. Whew. And there it is. A lightweight summer yukata, high summer yukata is very lightweight. It's gossamer. It's like air. The way it feels, because it's this beautiful cotton lawn. Can you see my hand? You can see my hand through that. Just not on the camera. I don't know what that's about. But it is so light and so fresh. It's almost like linen actually because of the weight of it. And that beautiful painterly line coming down in the check. Stunning. All finished. Look at that. Look at that when it twists as well. The line coming round. Beautiful little yukata. I'm really happy with that. And it's going to be fantastic when it warms up again, which to be fair won't be for a while, but I will have this ready for when it does, because that is a light yukata. Fantastic. Oh, I'm really happy with that. I hope you enjoyed watching me do it, and I hope you sewed along.